I mean, they're still in primary, so not
Yeah.
not that much of an issue.
Oh,
Actually, it has, that's right.
because none of my children have ever been to school. There's no way, especially today with the transsexual thing, the agenda. Basically, your children will lose their innocence as soon as they walk through that door. Concepts, not even necessarily pictures or images, concepts will be shared that will immediately make them grow up. They'll lose their childhood.
But look at it this way. I mean, I studied in a normal school, and hasn't affected me. And these concepts have been around for quite a while, as you know.
You know, they didn't have the internet then. That's the big difference.
Yeah, but even without the internet, I mean, just the concepts were there, the television was there.
Sure.
And you could learn quite a lot from that media. So yeah, I mean, it's.
The thing is, with this mobile phone, there are groups of young children who are doing this, and they're accessing hardcore pornography from the age of about 8, and they're disseminating it and sharing it. Most young children are sexualized to the point when me and you were young, there might be a few books that we'd look at, maybe a few magazines. But now, with that phone, I could find stuff in 10 seconds that would probably be illegal. And children are feeding from this. And this, for me, as a dad of daughters, on my watch, no matter how difficult it gets, on Judgment Day, because we'll be judged on what we know, primarily, if we know there's a likelihood our children are, in the Bible it talks about a stumbling block, anyone who puts a stumbling block in front of the least of these, it'd be better he had a millstone tied around his neck. I think we'll look at, if I knew there was a chance that my child was going to come back, he might have seen gay pornography today. I said, well look, God, on Judgment Day, maybe I'm going to figure in that. So if your children haven't gone to school, have they gone to preschool? Because you could still don't have to register if they're not at preschool.
You mean like pre-nursery or?
Yeah, well, we were on the, call it the radar to begin with, because I put my daughter's name down to start primary school. If I hadn't, I'm under no legal obligation to send my children to school whatsoever. I don't have to follow.
I mean, there are many people. I know many Muslims who do homeschooling. So
One of the Muslims I first bumped into was because he was a homeschooler, and he said most of the Muslims at his mosque think he's crazy. But he says, look, hang on, I'm the shepherd of this flock, and you know, they might think it's crazy, but when your children end up being crazy on the inside, whose fault's that? It can't be dad's, you know.
Well, I think the parents have to take a blame as well, because if they give the freedom to the children to do anything and go browse anything and anywhere, and give them the phone at a very young age, I think the parents have to be blamed for that as well.
I think they're going to, on Judgment Day, God's going to judge them. So maybe if you haven't sent your children to school, I would recommend, as far as judgment goes, don't send it.
Because I personally wouldn't give an 8-year-old or even a 9-year-old or even a 10-year-old a phone and an iPad just basically without any supervision, you know.
But their peers will have them. In the downtime, in between lessons, in the groups, unless your children are going to be remarkable to say, when we decided to homeschool, I thought, if my children are happy at school, that's going to kill me, because that means they're going to be into everything. And if they're not into everything, they're going to be miserable at school. So I shouldn't be sending them to school. And I think the best thing is to find other parents who feel similar. And with the Amish, they had their own private kind of school, and they had some of the young people, 20-year-olds who'd be the teachers, and the authorities would come and they'd expect to see certain things, but they'd go, they've only got half an hour, they're off, and you can avoid some of the more damaging things. And I mean, maybe it's not for me to say Muslims should homeschool their children, but if you want to live in a parallel society, which we should, send them to schools the way that the devil will get their hearts.
So all your kids are homeschooled?
Yeah, all 5 of them.
Like how old? What's the age range?
19 to 9.
Wow, amazing.
You know, but it's been tough.
So who does the homeschooling? You or the missus?
Nobody, no. We're now getting tutors, believe it or
I
not.
see,
because me and my parents don't come from an academic background. You know, I was in the building sites and stuff like that. My wife's not educated. But we realised that...
Tuition. Send them for tuitions.
Say again, sorry?
You basically send them to tuition.
Well, in the beginning we tried to do it ourselves, but as they get older they need more help. But a feather in your cap if it ever comes to people saying, why are you homeschooling, you shouldn't be doing it, say they've got tutors. That'll do nicely. There's a connection there with somebody who's educated, somebody who's got qualifications, and they move on to somebody else. But without that, they get very concerned about fundamentalism and stuff like that. You know, but if yours aren't at school yet and they're not actually enrolled, you've got a chance to avoid that 10-year grooming that they're going to undergo. And it's not, even if it's not in the classrooms, it will be in the playground. It'll be on the way to school, coming back.
Oh, there's always, like for example, the environment. Even if it's not the school, I mean, I don't know, even outside if they had friends or something, they can do that. So it's not just the schools. Nowadays, you know, like you said, the phones and the internet are everywhere. So it's not just isolated within the school itself. It's outside even.
So we had to make the decision, hang on, friends, if they go to school, I don't think we're going to be friends with them. Only because I had a friend who was a bit of a harsh term who said Chernobyl children who've been infected, they want to infect others, and they don't mean it, they think it's normal. But that's what they do. You know, and I don't know if you knew, because I was on one of these before on the YouTube thing, but I got exposed to pornography when I was about 7. Hardcore pornography that was in the house. And
it affects you badly, isn't it?
You will go to your grave with that in your mind. There's something it does to the brain, and you don't want your children to be shown. All it takes is one exposure, and it's like that child's been abused and their childhood's gone in a past.
That's true.
Yeah.
No, I mean, yeah, you're right, absolutely. And this doesn't, I don't think it's just the people who are religious who are concerned about this.
No,
I'm pretty sure even atheists and
yeah,
agnostic
100%.
and people of all backgrounds are concerned about, because your children are something that is basically part of you, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And
your heritage, your patrimony.
And that is basically the future, your future generation, your progeny.
Yeah, there's nothing more important than that.
And if you're not going to be responsible for that, who is? Who's going to?
Interestingly, they were looking at the leaders of the Western world, how few have got children, and they're saying there's a connection because it's like, I don't know if you in the Torah, it's got about Esau selling his heritage for peanuts. They don't have a heritage. They don't have a stake in the afterlife because there's going to be no one living. So you've got Theresa May got no children, Merkel got no children, Macron got no children. I think the Irish Prime Minister's got no children, the Italian Prime, no one's got children. They don't care how corrupted things get because they're gone. And there's a connection there.
I think Trump is an exception.
Perhaps. Yeah. Okay. I don't know what the Austrian president is either, but generally speaking, that's the norm now. No, not to have children, and I
don't know. I mean, I suppose so. Yeah. And those are not really very young people, the ones you mentioned.
No, I know, for sure. But so if you maybe with your wife talk about homeschooling.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, like you said, commonality between the three religions, the three faiths, because I know many Jewish people, they homeschool their children. They have separate schools. Similarly, they have the Muslims have their own Islamic schools and faith schools.
Yeah, and I think they should. I definitely think they should.
And the Christians as well. They've had faith schools since a long time, but their faith schools kind of like become more like state schools.
I know,
in a way,
it's going to be more and more, even with Islamic schools. They are going to, before you can even get a certificate, my brother's a teacher, and he says that you have to do this PSHE thing before you can actually be a teacher. That means you have to subscribe to all of these horrible things about homosexuality, transsexuality, and all of those kind of things. Before you can even be a teacher, you have to go through this process yourself. So all I'd say is, as a dad to another dad, I would seriously consider homeschooling.
No, you're very right. Sure. But there are certain churches which have kind of, I don't know, succumbed to this liberal pressure in a way. Because I was reading the other day about this, the Mennonite churches, which I think J. Smith is a part of.
Is he really a Mennonite?
Well, that's what he said in one of the...
very liberal Mennonite. Most Mennonites are liberals.
Yeah, but there are different Mennonite churches as well. Like, for example, some in America have accepted basically having the LGBT part of their within the priests as well, and some haven't. So there is different churches which have accepted within the churches, and I think it's probably the liberal society's pressure on them to accommodate these different basically lifestyles into the churches. So I think that is something that is a concern, not only, like I said, for the Jews and the Muslims, but also for the Christians now.
Oh yeah,
and
big time.
It's something that everyone has to grapple with, I guess.
As a Christian, I think probably 90% of the people who go to my church effectively would just be cultural adherents, but effectively no different to anybody else.
Because the Mennonites are very similar, aren't they, to the Amish, except that they do not shun technology like the Amish do.
You know what's funny? You can have, I think it's a fascinating thing, but you can have old order Mennonites who are far more conservative than Beachy Amish, who I was with.
All right,
so it's more like each congregation has, what seems to happen is when a congregation goes really liberal, there's some who say we're walking away and they start a fundamentalist kind of group, but it doesn't take long before that becomes liberal and it just keeps, the little churches keep splitting. But the old order Amish in America seem to have maintained, because of the lack of technology, 90% of your children in this day and age are still choosing to be old order Amish. And I say that says a lot.
Interesting,
That says a lot.
Interesting,
yeah.
And they also have, I think, very strict in terms of their dress code and all. Like, for example, the women, they cover their heads.
They cover their heads. They wear cape dresses. The men have beards, no moustaches. They dress, even the men would wear baggy trousers. They wouldn't wear jeans. See, I feel bad. I'm wearing denim.
I would have mistaken them for Muslims if I didn't know about it.
I think the early Christians. And I've got some evidence as a material here, but the early Christians were very, you've seen monks and you've seen nuns. That for the first 300 years of Christianity would have been the way Christians dressed.
And it's in the Bible as well. I mean, head covering for the women. And Paul is pretty strict about that.
He is, He's the one who brought it there. But
he would probably be blamed as a misogynist if he was living here today. Would he not?
Probably, he wouldn't be a popular man. Would he probably be arrested? Be arrested again. But
so, what do you think in today's? Do you think today's liberal society would accept that kind of lifestyle as a Christian in a Christian country?
I think you've got two options. One, you can attempt to live in this world and try and, as like a lone ranger, protect your children from the worst things, but they could end up like fruitcakes because you don't have any backup, there's not wider context.
That's true.
Or you meet with other people and you try to effectively exist in a parallel society, so you have your own set of norms, but you're in the world. And this is why I like the Beachy Amish. They had a garage, they had a workshop, they used to invite people in, but they did it from a position of strength as a group, as opposed to individuals, and it worked. They were loving, very, very kind of open, and you would have thought that the liberal, worldly people around them would have really hated them, but the fact they engaged with them, they bought a garage and used to sell booze and rude magazines and fags and stuff, and they said no, and we're not open Sunday either, and they said you're going to fail, but they didn't. They started a bakery, the products were that good, people started to be interested, they sing, they don't have musical instruments in their churches, so they're singing, they go out and they sing at the memorial services, and they've become like model citizens without giving an inch.
Interesting.
And I say
that's what takes courage, and it takes determination.
It really does.
I mean, because of the pressure of the secular countries today, I mean, many of the churches even, let alone these little groups, they succumb to the pressure and they have to accept basically what they are told in a way. Otherwise, we shut down your charities, we shut down your place of worship. And as you can see, like in continental Europe, many of the Muslims are facing this pressure on them, and basically, in a way, I would say it's persecution, because they're not allowed to dress the way they want to. And this is kind of unacceptable. It is no different to the other extreme, like for example the Taliban or whoever was forcing women to wear the burqa. And these people are basically snatching away the hijabs of the women. So it's just like two extremes, One is forcing on and the other is forcing off. And
very difficult to straddle.
And who is this? It is this poor Muslim woman who suffers in the middle, basically between these two different fanatics in a way. Isn't it?
And where do you find that? It's almost like there's a dynamic that's constantly changing. It never used to be that. Things used to take hundreds of years to change, and now things are changing every couple of years. There's new things. But when we joined the Amish, we were kind of like worldly compared to them, and they were inviting other worldly people to come. But what seemed to happen was, and this seemed to be the thing, so you have worldly people entering an unworldly church, and as they group together, there's a melding and there's a hybrid is produced. And so the worldly kids, I think, gained because they were reined in, but the ones who were walking the authentic kind of walk, they were then starting to encounter more liberal ideas. And I think with Islam, as your children go to school, even though they might still attend the mosque, inside there's this there's this disturbance dichotomy and a hybrid mentality where they're straddling two worlds.
Yes,
and that's a real challenge for us.
It's a challenge for all generations.
Yeah, isn't it just?
Yes.
Isn't it just? But I think something I'm slowly learning, my children need a bit of joy in their life.
They do, yeah.
And there's the danger of going too far down this.
Because obviously you cannot completely isolate them from the society either.
For sure.
That would be a bad thing for them and for you as well, I think.
I know.
So you have to walk in a very balanced lifestyle. And you have to obviously protect your children. At the same time, not isolate them from the society at large. Because both of them can be quite challenging at the same time, you know, because if you try to balance,
you could provoke your children to wrath if you did that. Because it's a bit like I'll admit I spent too much time shutting doors because I was damaged by the world. I thought I shut this door, shut this door. But I'm now realising every time I shut one, I need to open one, and that isn't quite what I affected. And I suppose my children are carrying some burden, but one thing they're not carrying is they're not carrying around with them this imagery of who they're meant to be, what as a woman in the world, you know, etc., and they haven't seen pornography. They've never been alone with men and had the intimacy, you know, and their innocence kind of destroyed. So even if they fail now, they will be able to recover because they've had a standard.
So prepared them.
Exactly.
Prepare the foundation.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's very important.
I think as dads, we know we can't protect them forever, and as adults, they have their own autonomy. But if we don't protect their innocence and allow that to be their bedrock, when they do meet sin, they won't even know it's sin.
Absolutely.
And that's, for me, the big thing with homeschooling. If you can just do that, and I was saying to God, look, if all I do is get them through, it's almost like the Mason-Dixon line, I want to get them through to 16, then they can't be touched. They can make their own decisions. But up until then, they're vulnerable, especially at primary school level.
Absolutely. No, you have, basically got the right concept of building them and strengthening them when they are still very vulnerable to the world at large. And that is what building foundations is all about, isn't it?
It's funny, we're back to what we were talking about with the foundations.
Yes.
So
you're
if you don't get the
right.
foundations right, most people are wandering around with psychiatric problems and are cold and unable to, you know, interact, etc., etc. Because something happened at the very foundational level, something that is a burden they're carrying with them all through their adult life. And please God, that despite making loads of mistakes, you can always say, children, forgive me. I stuffed up. I decide I need to approach each one of them individually and say, look, I know you're carrying burdens, and you will see some of the decisions I made as a result of why you're carrying the burdens. And I just want to say to you, everything I tried to do, I did for the best reasons, but I've failed on lots of them. Because I don't want them, when they're 30 years old, saying, my dad was this and my dad. It's like going into the bomb and saying, if I can just take a detonator out and say, look, I'm sorry. You can always ask our family for forgiveness. You know?
No, you're right. Yeah, I mean, it's quite important to bring them up in such a way. Because, you know, many people will say, oh, you're indoctrinating your children and all that. But at the end of the day, they're my children, right? And I have a right to protect them and to build the foundation for them to basically face the world. Because you see today, there are so many dangers. And it's not just pornography. There are many other dangers. Drugs, alcohol. I mean, there's the knife crime in London is basically at its peak now. And that's one of the worst things, you know. It's a lot of things. So you have to prepare them for a lot of things, not just one thing. So as a dad, you understand, and I'm sure many others who are listening will understand this as well. Because this is something which every parent faces and every parent experiences. And I think they should all just prepare, not just turn a blind eye to it.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's why
and regardless of the religion.
Yeah, that's why we moved to a rural area. We realised that if you live in a big city, there's a price to be paid for convenience. And normally it's your children who are going to pay the price for the convenience. So we moved to the west of Ireland. And that's where we kind of were living in a small farm. And we thought, we've got a few other families around us and you're part of the church. And I think we were heading towards like the wrong way, but when we met the Amish, I thought they seem to have been able to manage to be in the world. See, if you were in, say, a big city in Ireland, in Watford or whatever, and you saw one of these girls with a long white dress and a long, you'd think she was quite often some of the Amish brothers would say, people think I'm a priest and this is a nun.
Okay.
Say, because they don't have collars, they don't wear ties, again, those kind of things. And see, I'm fascinated by that kind of thing, but obviously I'm a Christian, obviously you're a Muslim, and it'd be interesting to explore some of those foundations. And I've got some things on me, because I know evidence is very important. So if I could share that with you, and maybe you can give me your response and just see where it goes from there.
Yeah, sure, why not? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What's your name, by the way?
Colin.
Colin, I'm Hashim. Yeah, very nice meeting you. Walaikum salam. Take care, inshallah.
Okay.